Hello, hello,
What is
hello.
going on, ladies and gentlemen? Ha.
Yes,
What's up,
sir.
David? We're
How you doing,
excited,
man?
bro.
Yeah,
We're
we are
excited. I'm
excited. Yeah,
excited.
I am.
You're
Yeah, that's
excited.
what we're. Yeah,
Dane's excited.
we're all.
I'm excited.
This is
We're all
good
excited.
stuff, man. These
Let's
are
do it.
those fun conversations that we have where we
Yes.
butt heads and we get in the last nasty and loud. No, I'm just saying we don't get nasty, but we do get loud sometimes.
David gets
But we do have a lot of fun. Hey, this is Faith Unaltered. I'm your host, David Russell, and I am here with Tyler Fowler and welcoming for the first time in Faith Unaltered, Dane Van Nuys. What's going on, Dane?
Hey guys, I'm excited for this conversation. I think it's a really interesting topic. I'm excited to be on Faith Unaltered. I've been on Complete Sinner's Guide, several times, but
yes.
it's cool to be on this. That was the first time I'd seen your new opening, and the music was epic. I mean, I felt like I was about to go to, war against some orcs. So it's real cool.
Right on. Yeah, man. So yeah. I remember it was kind of hard for me to place it because I was like, I know I just talked to Dane. Like it wasn't that long ago. I was on a show with you at CSG. So I was like, was that Faith Unaltered or was that CSG? So
it was CSG, and it was right after y'all had debated the deity of Christ, and we were, I think, continuing to talk more about the deity of Christ. And so that was an episode where we were all like-minded. Tonight will be a little different.
Yeah, I mean, that was awesome practical Christianity. For those who haven't seen it, Dane and I, Josh Davidson, Dane, and myself, we did a 2-part series on the deity and the humanity of Christ. And so that was a really, really fun discussion. But we're talking about young earth tonight. David, I know you wanted to say something just a second ago, so I didn't mean to interrupt you, brother. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to let you introduce the show and the positions and who has different positions and so forth.
So David's the heretic on this one.
I'm going to start after you do that. I'm just going to lay out something that the audience needs to know as far as this conversation goes.
You need to know it. So get a pen, get a paper, write it down because you need it, right? And so oh man, where to even begin? So I have been talking to both of these gentlemen off air and just discussing this. So we've been talking and planning this for about 2 weeks now. And I have honestly, so here's the thing, just from my perspective and my background on this subject, I have always, from the time that I was in church as a young child to the time, even now, I've always kind of considered the young earth perspective, the global flood, and all of these different things that tie together. And if you've never done an in-depth dive into the subject, those two things go hand in hand, let me tell you. And so here's the thing, though. After talking to Dane, and David, I'll let you go ahead, but I do want to hand it over to Dane to explain. Like I said, him and I were talking, and there is this, I think, primary, foundational, fundamental aspect to this entire conversation. But David, I will let you go first, and then Dane, I want you to talk about the character of God, how we were talking off air about how this conversation impacts that in and of itself. But David, go ahead, brother.
Well, you're probably going to hear some disagreement, some pushback tonight. Yes. Tonight is going to be a night where Dane is going to lay out his case, and I guess I'm going to follow it up, and then maybe me and him can talk afterwards, right? So I want to let everybody know that me and Dane are both consider each other brothers in Christ. This is not a dividing issue like some have made it out to be. This type of conversation, people lose friends over it. Churches divide, and it's not something that it should happen because, we don't need uniformity in Christianity. We need unity, right? So tonight, me and Dane will both claim that God created all matter, energy, space, and time, that God prepared the universe and earth as a home for humanity. God created many life forms, including plants and animals, to enhance the quality of life for human beings. God created Adam and Eve and placed them in a wonderful garden. God allowed Satan to tempt Adam and Eve to subtly solicit the rebellion against God's authority. God allowed Adam and Eve the freedom to disobey and thereby, pass their rebellious nature to their descendants, therefore pass it to their rebellious descendants, subjecting all humanity to the presence of sin and its impact. God gave humanity hope in the promise of a coming Redeemer. God came to earth in human form to atone for sin, and God is preparing a new creation for redeemed humans. So these are areas where me and Dane are basically going to agree. From there, we may part ways on certain things. However, those things what unite us in Christ.
I really like that, David. Thank you so much for that, brother. I really appreciate it. And just to reiterate really what David said, we don't need to divide over the subject. David and I have had some very, 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 very passionate conversations within the past 2 weeks, Dane and I as well. And I'm telling you, at the end of the day, we can agree to disagree on this subject and still remain unified in the body of Christ like we are. But Dane, I'm going to go ahead and hand it back over to you, brother. For those of you just joining us, thank you so much for listening, swinging by. We're talking young earth creation with Dane Von Ace. And Dane, you said that really we were talking off air last night, the night before about this. And you brought up a point, and I want you to kind of expound on what you meant by that. But you said this conversation for you primarily has the question of old earth creation. Does it have an impact on the nature of God and on his character?
Yeah, so before I jump into answering that, I want to just echo what both you and David said. This is a brotherly conversation. We could have this discussion and then right afterwards pass the bread and the wine to each other. So we are brothers in the faith, and we are both committed to, hey, you already got the wine going. And we are all
makes his own.
That's right. Do you really? That's cool.
He does. Yeah.
And we're all committed to that foundational Christian doctrine that God is the maker of all things, visible and invisible. So Young Earth, Old Earth is a fun in-house discussion, but we are all Christians here. So yes, Tyler, to answer your question, my primary concern with the age of the earth discussion is not the science, although I think that science will comport with young earth. And my primary concern isn't even the way that we exegete Genesis 1 through, we'll say 11. Okay, we'll go all the way to Babel. Although that's really important too. My fundamental, primary, foundational concern in this discussion is about the character of God and the holiness of God. I believe that old earth creation teaching accidentally impugns the character of God, because there is a line in Genesis 1 that happens over and over and over, and you just can't miss it. God looked out and he called it good. God looked out and he called it good. God looked out and he called it good, whether it's talking about the light that he's made or the vegetation that he has made or the animals that he has made. When he gets to humankind, he calls us very good, right? And so the old earth creationist is going to have God looking out over this creation and calling it good when there is rampant suffering, rampant violence, rampant bloodshed, rampant death. And of course, 1 Corinthians 15 teaches us that death is an enemy of God. So you would have God calling that good, that his enemy is out there doing stuff. And let me just put this with a real powerful illustration, because dinosaurs are cool. We all love dinosaurs. Old Earth, Young Earth, we're all into dinosaurs. In David's perspective, dinosaurs lived, millions of years ago, 65, 70 million years ago. And I believe, I won't put words in his mouth, but I believe he would assume that maybe some giant asteroid came and obliterated them, and they did go extinct. David would have God, maybe in the day 5 period saying, that's really good. I'm glad those dinosaurs suffered unnecessarily. That's good. I'm calling that good. This extinction is good. This chaos is good. The fossil record shows that, there's cancers and disease in animals, that there are animals who are brutally attacked and eaten. There's predatory prey relationships. There are all sorts of catastrophes. And we have to ask ourselves, how can God look out over all of that and call that good? How can God call that suffering good? How can God call that death good? And how can God call things that are good that he actually calls curses after Adam's fall? So he calls death a curse, or a punishment or a judgment. He calls thorns and thistles coming from the ground a punishment. And in David's worldview of the old earth, there's thorns and thistles way, way before Adam. So it's not a curse. It's something God calls good, according to his worldview. According to mine, thorns and thistles are something God would call bad and call that a curse. And we know that the original creation, it foreshadows that ultimate new earth and new heaven. And we know that in that place there is no more death. It's thrown into the lake of fire. It's the last enemy of Christ to be defeated. We know that there's no more suffering. He wipes away every tear. We know there's no more disease. And so I can't imagine that God would call good all these things that he, through elsewhere in Scripture, says are bad and are things that need to be redeemed. So to me, the old earth creationist position makes it sound like God lacks integrity when he calls the creation good, and then later in Scripture is going to tell us that suffering needs to be redeemed as if it's bad, and that death needs to be redeemed as if it's bad. And so to me, this is about, what does God mean by the word good? What is the goodness of God? What is paradise look like? What is God's holy character when it comes to the original creation? Could God look at the suffering of literally millions of years worth of suffering and chaos and violence and innocent bloodshed between the animals? Could he look out at that and call it good? I find that a difficult pill to swallow.
And so let me ask you, Dane, before I get David's response on that. So primarily, fundamentally, this old earth creation, David's view, it really does. I mean, and obviously David wouldn't say that, yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and impugn the character of God and, call him a liar and all different things. Obviously not. But that's my issue is that is primary for you, correct?
Correct. And yeah, I'm not accusing David of having those kind of thoughts. I think that most old earth creationists walk into this on accident and unintentionally. And I think that their motivation is good. They want to be as up to date on what the science textbooks are saying and things like this. So I don't think there's a bad motivation, but my primary concern is they're having God call good intense amounts of suffering and chaos.
David, what we haven't discussed that concept off air. What do you think about that, bro?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, Dane, on my view, I don't think you're looking at the bigger picture. I think Travis brought up a good point. I just want to share it. He said to say that evils, especially natural evils, were brought on by God because Adam and Eve sinned, makes God petty and vindictive and calls him to question his character too. And that's something you're going to have to consider. You're also going to have to consider where that contradicts what the Scripture, where God actually gives the lion its prey, in the Psalms. So if God thinks that's good, and the rest of that Psalm, I mean, there's no doubt to say that's good because it's God providing for his creation. I think we've got a big issue here. I think you're looking at this from a certain perspective and not a broader perspective, such as I don't look at the innocent earth view like, before the fall. I don't look at it as plan A. I think that there's a plan B. There's a reason he put us in the garden. Also, Dane, I don't know what you would say about metabolism. Humans had to eat, right? Even before the fall. And there's animal death and decomposition of food that goes through your body and providing you nutrients. So we were feeding off the land at some point. And you've got to consider these things when you're, piecing together this worldview. Utopia sounds nice. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the garden was a utopia for us, but I don't think that was ever the plan. I think Christ always had to be involved. Jesus always had to be involved. There was no way we'd reach a resurrected state in the innocence of Adam, of the first Adam. I don't think so. There's no way I mean, the angels were in the presence of God, and they didn't have Christ, and they had perfection, and they still fell. So I mean, yeah, man, I think there's a bigger perspective going on here. You're talking about animal suffering. I don't think there's needless suffering. I don't believe in needless suffering. When an animal dies, and this is where I think God was like, "Hey, this is good." Why? Because it's not perfect. Because there's going to be a fall. I don't know. You're of the Reformed perspective, so you probably understand that. A lot of Reformed people do believe that Christ's redemption is retroactive, right? Because the Lamb was slain, as it says in Revelation, since the foundation of the world, right? So, and you said that it also foreshadows redemption, right? The whole thing, or the whole creation account, and Genesis account, it does foreshadow redemption. So, I don't think there's a plan A of staying innocent. Mankind needed a tree to survive. So obviously the earth was subject to decay even at that point. So, I mean, there's things that are, and that's confirmed in Romans 9, right? So, I mean, there's so many different aspects I don't think you're taking into consideration, because it sounds like to me you're just reading that you have a definition of good that I don't think encompasses all that God considers good, because when an animal dies, right, it gets rejuvenated into the ground. And what does that do for us later on, right? It provides fertile ground. It provides nutrients into the soil, fuel, carbon. I mean, a lot of plant death will cause coal for later generations. God knew we'd need all that, especially in a fallen world. He knew we were going to fall. So based off of all his knowledge, a way he could make animals dying and this and that, making it good would be to not that let those deaths be in vain, but actually provide for his creation through it. So I think there's another aspect here that needs to be considered. And I'm actually working on a theodicy here based on these type of things. So, and
there is a lot to respond. Sorry.
Yeah,
go ahead,
I was writing some of those points down, and if I miss any of them, let me know, because I think that there is a response to each of these. I'll start with the predatory prey relationship, because you're right. In the Psalms, there is a moment where it talks about how God basically provides the food for the lion and things like this. And in this fallen world, that is exactly how the lion eats. But we know that relationship, predatory prey relationship, is going to be redeemed and totally changed, because Isaiah 11 says that one day in paradise, the lion's going to lie down with the lamb and eat straw. So what's even better than the predatory prey relationship is when the lion goes back to being, an herbivore, basically. And just because God says something is allowed in Scripture in the fallen world doesn't mean that God endorses it. And so a perfect example of that is divorce, right? God gives laws for divorce, but we know that God hates divorce. So God gives food to the lions, but that doesn't mean he likes the suffering of the gazelle. And it's not that he endorses predatory prey relationships, but this is the fallen world that we live in. So that would be my response to that. In terms of plant life dying,
can we go through this one at a time? Can we go through this one at a time?
Okay.
Like real quick. Yeah, because I would really like to.
Well, hold on, David.
I'll forget. We'll
okay.
Let's go through one at a time.
We can go through one at a time. We can talk about predatory prey relationships, and does God think that that's good?
And then after that, I would like to discuss the plant life versus animal or plant death and animal death as well. So,
well, you don't get an opinion here. You're just the host. So,
well, I don't care. I can boot you. I promise you that. Go ahead, David.
No, go ahead. You wanted to you all have an agreement discussion. No, so what you're saying about like what God allows in this fallen world, I don't think the lion will ever go back to be an herbivore. Ever go back. I think he'll enter the new creation. I think he'll go to the new creation as one. I don't think that the state before the fall is the state that's going to remain, right? I think there's something a lot different planned for us. Like God goes someplace to prepare a place for us. So I think there's going to be a new creation, right? So how that looks, I don't know. I don't think any of us do, but it's going to be something beyond our wildest imagination. And we're going to have resurrected bodies. We're going to have the same bodies as Adam did pre-fall. We're not going to have to eat a tree off of a tree to stay alive because the sun got involved. And because the sun got involved, we have this rejuvenation of life. So would I say that predatory prey relationship is ideal or good? No, but God did say that's one of the ways he provided for them. And it's probably due to the fact that we were, as humans, going to be the biggest predators alive. So I wouldn't say that I would still say that creation's good. I mean, look at all the things that we see in this creation that we're just in awe of. I can look at the moon, right, and just be like, wow, man, this is so beautiful, right? And this thing's got crater impacts, bombardment. But I look at it and I'm just in awe of how it all works. And like a sunset, the beauty of a sunset. And I can look at all this beauty and just be like, yeah, it's good. What
David,
makes it really bad?
Can I ask you this real quick?
Sure.
Since God's going to destroy this creation, if it's so good like that, why is that the ultimate end? Why the need for a new creation and a new earth if this is good?
Well, it's not perfect, and God wants us to enter into perfection with him. So
how do you define good?
Well, and that's the thing. It does come down to a definition of good. So, yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Like, I think what I think is Dane's working with a very narrow definition of good, where I would consider a larger, broad spectrum, eschatological good, even.
That would include suffering and death, correct?
What? No. No, I said eschatological good. Like, he looks out at the whole plan, the whole purpose, the whole thing, and says, this is good.
So okay, so, the thing is, though, is that in the Garden of Eden, first of all, we know that humankind, and you were saying that we would end up being the biggest predator of all in a fallen world, and I agree with you. We certainly have been. But in the Garden of Eden, humankind didn't eat meat. It's actually not until after the flood that God allows us to eat meat and instructs us in that way. So it does seem that Adam and Eve were not predators in the garden. And so if the greatest predator, human, wasn't a predator, then the lesser ones probably weren't either. I see no reason to believe that there was any death or dying in the animal kingdom in Eden. And I think that new creation is getting us back. Yes, it'll be even better because it'll be resurrected, but it's getting us back to that original creation that God called good, a place with no disease, no pain, no suffering. And so that's why Isaiah 11 mentions there won't even be predatory prey relationships. The lion will go back to how it was made to be. Just like humans are going to go back to how we were made to be. We were made to be in fellowship with God. We were made to be, sin-free and obedient and worshipful. The lion's going to go back to how it was originally meant to be, and it was eating straw and lying down with the lamb. I see new creation as restorative, not just brand new and like everything's completely totally changed and morphed, although we will be totally changed in terms of going from lesser to greater glory. But I don't think it's like the nature of the thing entirely changes. I don't think that the lion, if God wanted the lion to keep eating meat in the new heavens and new earth, then he would. So the fact that Isaiah 11 talks about the lion as becoming, an herbivore, to me, that's a sign that that's what's good for the lion. And so God calling it good in the original creation, the original lion, a good lion, doesn't eat meat.
Yeah, but Dane, that just doesn't comport because there's no given or given in marriage once we enter into the new creation as well. So, I mean, Jesus makes that specific. So it's not going back to the original state there. So, there is something that I think you're working with this narrow view of what this eschatological end is going to be. And I mean, it's quite different. We're not going to, and to say that animals weren't herbivores, it's kind of like I can't really pin down what you're trying to say here, because you said in Eden there is no death, there is no suffering. I agree, it's a wondrous garden, right? like I said. However, that's the garden, not the rest of the outside. And you said that all this was good, but then then the Bible uses language is like in the first chapter of Genesis to tell us to subdue and have dominion over. Mm-hmm. Subdue is a very violent word in the Hebrew, a very violent word. Okay, and so is dominion, is like conquering. So I think you're making an assumption that God didn't give us all of these, didn't have this plan. I mean, especially, I think you're a Calvinist, right?
I'm a Reformed Arminian.
Oh, okay, never mind then. I'm gonna shut up on that one.
Well, one.
No, seriously. But yeah, I'll let you have the last word at each of these gestures, since you're laying out your view, and we can move on to the next. I just want to, just respond maybe one or two times, and then let Tyler, also come in whenever he wants to. But yeah, so I'm good. I'm done.
So the marriage of Adam and Eve is good. And there is a good marriage in the new heaven and new earth that it foreshadows, which is that of Christ to his bride. Yeah, we're no longer given or receiving in marriage, but there is one great marriage. The culmination of all history is actually a wedding supper of the Lamb, right? So Adam and Eve's union, I think, foreshadows Christ's union to his church. So I wouldn't say that metaphor and symbology of marriage is totally obliterated. So, okay, we can move on from predatory prey, but one last thought on it. So let me put myself in your shoes and say, okay, maybe it is good for there to be predatory prey relationships. Maybe that is how God designed it, good even before the fall. Now, I don't believe that. I'm just putting myself in your shoes for a moment. That still wouldn't explain the excessive and unnecessary suffering, like an asteroid causing catastrophe to dinosaurs, which causes them to go extinct. God looks out over that too and calls it good. God calls everything good before the fall. That's the way the Genesis 1 reads. And so in your view, you wouldn't just have to explain predatory prey relationships, which you may think is too narrow of a view that I'm focusing on. But I actually think my view is much broader than that. I'm talking about cancers being on the earth. I'm talking about extinction. I'm talking about violent, volcanic eruptions. I'm talking about asteroids colliding with the earth. What do you make of excessive suffering?
I don't think there is excessive suffering. I think it's all has a purpose. I do believe that everything has a purpose and a teleology that is pointed to an ultimate end, which ends in perfection.
What would it? I mean, I know you're not in the mind of God. I know you're not in the mind of God, but what could
I know? Here's the thing: is that
the reason for the dinosaur extinction by asteroid?
Well, I think the large part of these extinction level events were to provide necessary resources later down the line for humanity. So I think they all had a purpose,
and I provide bread and fish. He can feed 5,000 with just a couple bread and fish. God doesn't
but here's the thing. And then God gave us fish, too. So, but no, I know what you're going with there. But here's the thing, though, Dane, is that God does everything with a purpose in mind. He knew what was going to happen. It happened, and he had the earth set up to provide for his creation.
Can I ask a question?
Because he knew it was going to go beyond that. I don't think there was needless suffering. You said Jesus can give us all that stuff, but if we remained in a state of innocence, we wouldn't have needed Jesus.
Right. And I actually
right. I think that's what this is predicated on, is that there was an entire plan that was going to go forth, and that plan was going to is good. I think that whole idea was good. I think it was better for us not to remain in a state of innocence, but to ultimately have the Son in us to give us that life later, that eternal life, without having to even eat a fruit to stay alive. So I think there's a lot more to it than just that. And I think overall, when you look at it in a broad perspective, that, and I'm not saying you're narrow, Dane. What I said is like certain definitions I think are a little narrow here. But Tyler, go ahead. I know you had a question. I'll let you end on with that one.
Yeah, and Dane, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you really answered Dane's question. It was more so directed to the fact that there is suffering. You just said that there was a purpose to suffering, but it's still suffering, is it not?
Yeah, but suffering's not all bad. Suffering builds character. It can provide a whole bunch of
aspects of that suffering build character, but still, whenever we're suffering,
but
I mean, I know when
that's a consequence of reality. Sorry.
Can I finish? Okay.
Yeah.
Whenever I'm suffering, I pray to God, get me through this. Why? Because it's not pleasant, even though that I know it's going to build my character. God's got a purpose for that. Suffering still sucks. We talk about it on Faith Unaltered, a couple weeks back about the practical. Whenever we was talking to J.D. Martin about sin and suffering, and that, yes, God does have a purpose for this. But at the same time, we can't negate the fact that it is still horrible. In some cases, it is very, very, very evil, the suffering that people cause. You see what I'm saying? So just because that there's a purpose in suffering, I don't think that negates the fact, and I don't really think you answered Dane's question.
Yeah, I really did. I didn't distinguish between moral suffering that mankind inflicts, like moral evils. I'm talking about suffering in general, which is a consequence of boundary. Honestly, it's a consequence of reality that, like, if I'm walking and I stub my toe, yeah, it sucks, but that's a consequence of there being a piece of matter in my way.
Is it good? It's not good that you stub your toe, though, in that
sense,
right?
But it's not bad either. It's not evil either.
Well, let's think about catastrophes, right? Because, like, an asteroid striking the Earth is a catastrophe. Mm-hmm. The idea that could be happening in the context of goodness, to me, stretches the definition of goodness too far. Because when a disaster that God brings to a city in I can't remember if it's in Amos or Isaiah, but God actually you can translate it as He's bringing evil, right? Now he's not doing it immorally. Obviously, everything God does is holy, but the word can actually be translated that if evil befalls a city, did it not come from the Lord, or something like that. But He wouldn't be doing that in paradise. He wouldn't be doing that in a unfallen world. It would be pretty strange to imagine God bringing fire and brimstone on a sinless planet. That doesn't make much sense to me.
Yeah, God doesn't God's not bringing fire and brimstone.
Well, He brought an asteroid on the dinosaurs, and in your view,
is that but that's not a problem. Why is that not a problem? Because that also prepared the Earth for the planetary bombardment. If we didn't get bombarded with planet extraplanetary degrees, we wouldn't have some of the minerals that we have today. So we use those things to provide for the technology we have now. So, I mean, all this is involved in that larger scheme of things. So here's a big difference, though. Go ahead. Hey, Travis said he would like to come on. You want to bring him on, Tyler?
Well, I said we might have to have a part 2 with Travis. So that wasn't part of this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I got 2 against 1 here, though. So,
are you feeling overwhelmed? I mean, I can stop.
No. Well, here's the thing, though, about preparing the planet with minerals for technology and things. I think this is a big difference between the way we approach things. And I'm not saying one's better or worse, but I believe God created this world with all the minerals necessary by special creation. So just as He can bring Adam out of the dirt, which you and I agree on that He brought Adam out of the dirt as a fully mature human, and Eve from his rib as a fully mature human. He can create a fully mature earth with minerals abundant and oil and coal, and all sorts of things. So I don't really see the need to say that God had to use naturalistic processes for that when He can use supernatural processes for that.
Yeah, I don't think that's a natural process. I don't believe that there's really a dividing line like people would say that there is. There's not this huge dividing line between the natural and the supernatural. I just think that's the way God did it. I think that's the way that God did it. Well, I mean, you okay, so miracles, for example, okay, if I come into a room and lift a box that weighs 10 pounds, that's within my ability to do, right? But if I come in there, to a thing and I can't lift a 1,000-pound box, right? But God can, that's within God's ability. So miracles at times
God's tied into nature. He is by definition supernatural.
Well,
God is
yes, supernatural. Yeah, absolutely.
So,
yeah, but here's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that when I look at miracles, I see that there's things God can do that I can't. He can bend the laws of nature. He can, come in and change things. But I don't think I think there's also how he made this world, and this is the way he did it. So we're coming from two different aspects. So I think in retrospect, I still would hold to my position, but I just think we have different starting points on that, on how I think creation came to be.
Just to jump in, so I, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, brother, but I think Hugh Ross would define those miracles as transcendent miracles, if I'm not mistaken. How he created the world, right? Those aren't through natural laws, right? That he created the earth out of nothing. All of us, I think, agree with that. But that's what you're talking about, transcendent miracles.
Dane or me?
You.
Oh yeah, I think that God does transcend, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, I agree, but I don't think he did that all the time. He doesn't do miracles all the time.
Right.
It's a rare thing. That's why it's called a miracle, right? So yeah, and I think that, I mean, as far as being an apologist, if you're saying that God did all these things supernaturally and he put all these things in the earth supernaturally, I mean, you're really getting rid of the fine tuning of the universe. All the initial conditions are wiped out. So, I mean, there is no fine tuning. I mean, I don't know how you square with that. But anyways, that's a whole nother topic.
So, I want to move on to plant life and death. Because here's the thing. I think that plants don't die. Okay. Plants wither and the flowers fade, right? But the Bible doesn't speak of them being living souls that die in the same way as a human or an animal. They don't have the breath of life in them. So when the Bible talks about human death, it uses the word death. When it talks about flowers and plants decaying, it says they wither or they fade, right? That's Isaiah 48, I think. So there's nothing, and also they don't have nervous systems or brains or anything like that. So there's no suffering when a plant is eaten. And also in the garden, we wouldn't necessarily, even with Adam and Eve eating apples or figs or dates or whatever they may have, we wouldn't actually have an example of a plant dying. A piece of fruit is the bud of a plant. It's not the plant itself. So the plant would continue to thrive and produce more fruit. It's kind of like when a human gets a haircut, the human didn't die. The hair just fell to the ground. So a tree
need a haircut, Dane. No, just kidding.
The tree producing fruit and then the fruit being eaten is not the same as the tree dying. But more fundamentally than that, God values human life and animal life in a much different way than he values plant life, because plants are not, they don't have the breath of life in them. They don't have, I forget what it's called. Is it nephesh in the Hebrew? They don't have the breath of life in them. And so I don't see there being any problem with plant life, fading in paradise or even in new heaven and new earth. And we know for a fact that plant life will be consumed in the new heaven and the new earth, because Jesus says specifically in Mark 14:25, I won't drink of the fruit of the vine with you again until I drink it with you in the kingdom. And so we know we're going to be mushing grapes in the kingdom of God.
Oh yeah, and that's the thing, is like, so again, it comes from a matter of perspective. I mean, biologists would disagree with you. You can say they wither, but plant death is plant death. I mean, plants do decay. They're subject to decay. So I mean, all that existed pre-fall. So yeah, so I mean,
but there's nothing bad about plant. I guess it goes back to the definition.
And I'm saying when there's a plan and a purpose, thus things aren't technically bad if God has a bigger plan, a bigger purpose, right? It's kind of like that whole Molinist defeater idea. How do we know, what God's overall goal is, his overall plan, and could he still call it good based off that overall plan? Now, are there things that...
Check this out, though. We know that in the new heavens and new earth, lions will no longer eat meat. They'll eat straw. Isaiah 11. But we know that in the new heavens and the new earth, we will still eat fruit because Jesus says we're going to have wine to drink in the kingdom with him. So God sees it as better for predatory prey relationships to stop, but he doesn't see it as better for fruit consumption to stop. And so I basically see whatever is good for the new heaven and the new earth is good for the original paradise. And so that's kind of how I would distinguish between the animal and the plant.
If I can just kind of jump in, and I'm not trying to interrupt, Dane. It's just my thoughts on this whole issue to help our listeners maybe. In Revelation, it specifically says, I believe in its chapter 21 or 22, that death will no longer exist, right? It ceases to be, I think the Greek word it's basically annihilated, right?
Death is put in the lake of fire.
Yes, death is thrown into the lake of fire. And I think, that symbolically adds to the case. It adds weight to the case that death is no more, right? This is one of the things that we can rejoice about. This is the absolute, I think, primary hope of the Christian, is that we will no longer face death. Once our body dies, if Jesus doesn't come back first, our body dies. That is it. That is it. And yet, if we'll eat grapes and plants and vegetables and all these different things in the kingdom, which I would agree, and I think we all would agree that we will, that's not death. Mm-hmm. So even if scientists do and biologists do say, there's plant death, and yes, I understand, I think we all agree that plants decay, right? There's that fundamental categorical difference between what God calls death for things with the breath of life in them versus an animal or I'm sorry, a plant decaying. That's just my thoughts on it, though.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, but I also want to just point out that I think it's incorrect theologically to assume that the eschatological state will be merely a return to the pre-fall conditions of paradise. Okay, the pre-fall covenant of works that God made with Adam included an offer of eschatological advancement to a state of higher glory than he had originally created. One of the distinct theological contributions of Reformed theology, for example, according to Gerardus Voss, is that what we inherit in the second Adam is not restricted to what we lost in the first Adam. It is much rather the full realization of what the first Adam would have achieved for us had he remained in an remained unfallen and been confirmed in a state. This can be seen in the Reformed doctrine of the fourfold state of man, goes through the state of innocence, the condemnation in Adam, the state of grace, and then the state of glory. So I don't know, man. When I look at like animal death, I mean, just done my own research in it, having examined like passages frequently used by young earth creations that deny pre-fall animal death, I think there are two passages which positively teach that carnivorous activity is not a result of sin per se, but part of God's good provision of his creation from the beginning. So just my idea. So
I was mouthing something there while you were talking, David, and I was saying that I think Dane and I would agree with everything that you're saying. I don't think the argument, and I'll let Dane speak for himself, but from my perspective anyway, I'm not saying, and I wouldn't say that the new creation is going to be an exact representation of what Eden was per se. I think it's much, much better than
that. That's inconsistent. Yeah, and that's inconsistent from what Dane was kind of saying in a way when he was like, well, if it's good enough for this time and it's good enough for if it's good enough for the new heaven, then it was good enough in paradise. I mean,
Dane,
I just say
brother.
What I meant by that is the new heavens and the new earth will obviously be better than Eden, which means that the goodness standard, is it's even more good than the original good, but it won't be less good in any way, right? Eden won't have anything in it that was better than the new heaven and the new earth, and so if the lion lying down with the lamb is good, and that is a good standard, then the relationship that in Genesis 1 is them lying together, that's good. God calls it good. So their relationship will be even better in the new heaven and the new earth, but it won't be less than lying down together.
Yeah, but Dane, you're assuming that all lions and bears and tigers were laying down in the garden. We don't know what was really in the garden.
Yeah,
we don't know what animals.
All the animals that God formed were brought.
Yeah, there was probably like one or two, but like, what about on the outside? What about, I agree that there was probably no death in the garden. Okay, that God probably fed all these animals from the tree of life. Okay, Adam and Eve were supposed to take care of them and store it over the garden. Okay, so Adam and Eve probably fed those animals. Okay, that doesn't account for the rest of creation. The garden wasn't all of creation. Earth is pretty big, and God did isolate humankind into a garden. So
God calls the whole creation good. He doesn't just call the garden good.
And again, yeah. So absolutely. So then we come back to my overall point, which involves all the other aspects, right, that we have just went over. And I will reiterate it. We can move on.
Yeah. Here's a question that's in the same vein, but it's a different angle at it. In Genesis 3, starting in verse 17, and to the man God said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree about which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field by the sweat of your brow. So thorns and thistles are a punishment for Adam, and it's not just in the garden, because God's also going to exile them out of the garden. So it seems that when God curses the ground, that's the first time that thorns and thistles arrive, whether inside or outside of the garden, because God said, now, the ground is cursed now because of your fall, thorns and thistles. Now, in your understanding of the science, you would have to put thorns before Adam based on your understanding of the fossil record. So I don't understand how you would square that with Genesis 3, 17 and 18, that thorns don't arrive until after sin enters the world. So I'd like your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything off the top of my head for it. So I mean, we can. Yeah, I don't have an answer for that one.
Okay,
so
same.
I do think that it was obviously there outside of the garden, and I think that there was a curse. But I've always,
So you believe there was a curse before the fall?
I think no, I don't. No.
Well, because the thorns is the direct result of the curse, and it's not just inside of Eden. And it's not just inside of Eden, because God's kicking them out of Eden. So the ground that God is cursing is the whole thing. Remember in Romans 8, all of creation was subjected under the one who subjected it.
I just don't have an answer on that right now. That's all I'm saying. I'm sure there's an old earth answer for it, but I just don't have it right now.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Can I ask a clarifying question? David, do you believe the Bible, whenever it talks about the curse, do you believe the Bible is just saying, or just limiting the curse to the garden?
No.
Okay. The whole earth was cursed from Adam's sin?
Yeah, I just think I think all of creation suffers under that curse. But we live in a fallen state. So yeah, there's obviously things that that did happen and change.
So let me ask you this. What would you say the primary difference between the garden and everything else outside the garden was before and after the fall?
What do you mean by that?
Okay, so there's a difference. It sounds like what you're saying is that there's a difference between the garden and the rest of the world pre-fall, correct?
There obviously is. Absolutely.
Okay. What's the difference?
Why would he isolate us?
Okay, so what changed after the fall?
What do you mean what changed? We got exiled out of the...
Was the garden the only thing that changed?
I said no.
Well, that's what I'm trying to ask. And I
already answered that, right?
Yeah, David doesn't believe there was any curses before the fall.
No, I get that. What I'm trying to ask is, there's a difference between the garden and the rest of the world before the fall. Did anything change then after the fall? Was the garden the only thing that was affected by the curse? If everything else, if there's death outside the garden, if there's all of these different things outside the garden, my question is, I'm sorry I'm not being clear, guys, what changed? Like, why the need for a curse? If everything is like this already, then it seems to me that after the curse, after the fall, the only thing that would change from David's view is the garden itself, since that was perfection. The curse didn't have an effect outside of that. Maybe it's just me. I don't know.
Well, one thing that we know changed is that thorns and thistles came into existence after the fall. And I do think that that's a pretty devastating biblical fact for old Earth, because the way that old Earthers understand the fossil record has thorns like way before mankind. But a similar question, David, to the when do thorns come into reality would be, when does rain come into reality? So in Genesis 2:5, it appears that God hasn't brought rain upon the earth, and Adam is already here at that point. So you would have
I would not have a problem with that. I know how to read ancient Hebrew text, and I know that there's every ancient civilization structured their creation accounts in that similar way. So there is a definite, I don't see a huge, and that would equal just the same amount of problem for you as well. I mean, did Adam exist before rain came on the earth? Did he also exist before plants? So he existed before plants, because
God made the plants fully mature on day 3?
Yeah, and if you look at man,
rain for 2 or 3 days.
Yeah, but it also says that there is no plants either in that
no.
same
So there's
area.
no it's not that there's no plants. It's that there's no gardened cultivated plants. Let's see what it says. It's and that's actually going back to the subdue. That's actually how I understand the subdue. It can get pretty wild out there. You got to take care of the garden, make sure that the garden doesn't become wild.
And how would that be wild? What would be wild about it? Would weeds come up? Would weeds come up?
I think that outside of the garden there would have to be weeds.
Yeah, what I'm saying with all the whole thorns and thistles thing, I think there's just aspects that I don't think we've fully explored yet. Especially as far as I know, I haven't. I haven't looked into the old Earth response for that. It doesn't mean there isn't one out there. Maybe
sure
look
is.
into it yourself too. Yeah. So I mean, I know I looked into it at one point, but I haven't really done this in like 10 years, bro.
Fair enough. And this is the first time I've ever debated. Well, it's really more.
Yeah. Well, we're not really debating. I want you to lay out your position.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just talking.
Well, so okay, we've really barely scratched the surface, which is cool because there's so much to talk about. And so I guess we could move on into other stuff. And I do want to bring in some kind of science discussion at some point too, because I know, David, you're a lot of interest in that. But there's a few more biblical things. Well, more than a few more. So I don't know how y'all want to direct the conversation.
Well, let me do this, Dane. Let me do this real quick. So Travis has a question. For Dane, and then we can transition into, I mean, if we want to go to carbon-14 or helium inside of zircon crystals. I mean, I know we want to talk about science, and I think Dane, wow, we're already in an hour. See why I didn't do this on the radio? No way.
I can go as long as y'all want, really. I mean, I know we had talked about an hour and a half, but there's a few more biblical things I want to talk about before science, though.
Okay, fair enough. So let's do this question for Travis, or from Travis. Then we'll hit a couple more points with biblical, and then we'll transition into science. So, okay, Travis says this, and y'all bear with me on this one. Travis, thank you so much. He went into detail. This is a 3 comment question, so bear with us. So here we go. Question for Dane, part 1. What are your thoughts on Trent Dordery's saint fostering theodicy that includes animals? IOW, their sufferings are integrated into a composite whole, which would not have the value it does had it not transpired. Though the defeat condition, if animals' soul build and are given a martyrdom status in the eschaton, would you agree that contains a value that God, as a non-human moral agent, would be motivated in permitting? Dane, do you want me to go through those without reading them again? Just flash them on the screen so you can, since that was a pretty lengthy question.
The point of the question, basically, that God has such a purpose for the animal death, maybe like David's talking about, that it produces oil or things like this, that it's basically they get martyrdom status because what they're doing is for the greater good. First of all, I think that would water down the definition of martyrdom. There are people who have died for the greater good who weren't Christian martyrs. Martyrdom is dying for the gospel, for the faith. So I don't think I could ever classify an animal as a martyr. Any more than I can classify, someone, a non-Christian dying in war as a martyr. It still may be a huge sacrifice, but it's not martyrdom. And also, again, God can do whatever God wants, and everything God does is going to be holy. But to me, it's the intensity of the violence and chaos that old Earth posits happen to some of these animals. So, like, if God needed dinosaur flesh in the ground to produce oil for us, which of course is a silly thing to say because God doesn't need anything to produce anything for us. He can snap his finger, speak a word, and there's oil in the ground. But let's just say he needs these dinosaurs to decay in the earth for whatever reason. It doesn't have to be by intense catastrophe of asteroid bombarding the planet, the amount of shock and fear and anguish and that these dinosaurs would have felt. Obviously, those are, maybe I'm humanizing them too much, but anything with a brain and senses and a nervous system would be sent into an incredible amount of shock when they see this asteroid collision occurring. Instead, if God's going to do that, why not just have them all fall asleep and not wake up one day? That would be a lot less suffering, and it would still accomplish the same purpose.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
So
I was going to say, I was going to say, yeah, man. If that's the case, I mean, why doesn't God do that with his people? Instead, he tells us to rejoice in our sufferings and that we need to bear a cross and we need to actually suffer. You know what I mean? So I mean, there's a lot to this that I think that unfortunately, even this, I think we need a theodicy and there's other aspects we're going to have to look at. This is obviously not old Earth, young Earth debate right now. This is more of a theodicy debate. But I did want to read you this. I did look it up real quick. God said that when Adam planted a crop, it would bring forth thorns and thistles. We know that the Garden of Eden, where Adam was a special place separated from the rest of the world. Perhaps there were no thorns or thistles there. Now that Adam was being kicked out, he was exposed to these thorns and thistles. I don't know if I buy that one, but one thing we know
thorns and the thistles is the direct result of the curse.
But but here's the thing. And that's because he was being kicked out of the garden. That's what this is saying. But one thing we know with 100% certainty was that God was finished with creation prior to Adam's sin, and he did not start creating again with thorns and thistles. After the chart, Mortensen shows a picture. I can't share the entire screen here, but it shows a picture with the days contrasted. Initially, he shows day 3, the creation of plants and animals, bright sun filled, and then shows the sun being created in the day 4 picture, whatever. So there's when it comes to planetary formation, which is not known. After all, we have never seen a planet form. So that was it. I mean, it was going. It basically says that, gives a defense to saying, hey, look, Adam is now out of the garden, right? That now he has to deal with thorns and thistles and stuff like that. So, that would be still a direct result of the fall. So, I mean, like I said, I don't know if I buy that one 100%. Like I said, I'd have to look a little bit more into it myself, because that's one you don't really get into until you get into Genesis chapter 3. But we do know that he was done with creation during day 7. He didn't create anything new. So these thorns and thistles could have been, something that maybe I don't know, somehow evolved in that aspect. I don't want to use like evolution, but or maybe, well, it's what's really interesting, I think, though, is the fact that we know plants have these mechanisms in them that are defense mechanisms, and they've always had it, so I mean, it's interesting. So I think that's something that I, for myself, because I focus more on cosmos stuff and this and that.
Right.
So
one thing that
I would like to look at the geography of it or whatever.
Yeah.
So the one real quick response. The reason I wouldn't be convinced by that response to the thorns and thistles is because it directly says the ground is cursed because of you. Speaking to Adam, right? The ground is cursed because of you. So to me, it seems like Adam's sin comes first, then thorns and thistles, and that they weren't even out there in the outside of the garden area, because God, again, he wouldn't use something as a curse that he had just a while back called good. If God's original creation included thorns and he calls it good, then how could he call it a curse later, right? So God wouldn't call the same thing thorns good on day 3 and then a curse however long it took Adam to fall. Does that make sense? I mean, your position would be that he calls the thorns good on day 3 when he makes them, and he calls it a curse on day so and so after Adam falls.
Yeah, and you got to think that that's that would be a bad thing for humankind, because now he's got to work with these plants, and like Travis,
it's the ground that is cursed. It's the human's curse is to have to produce food by excessive labor. The woman is, of course, going to have pain in childbirth. The curse of the thorns is actually the cursing of the ground. And again, Romans 8 talks more about how God subjected even the creation to futility because of the fall of Adam. So it's not just the man, the woman, and the serpent that get cursed. The entire creation actually gets cursed. And the evidence of that is the thorns. And it actually has some really beautiful foreshadowing of the passion of Jesus Christ. Why is he wearing a crown of thorns? Because he became the curse for us. He took on our curse. It's not an accident that it was a crown of thorns. It's going all the way back to the imagery of Genesis, that this is the curse that God put upon the ground, and now our Savior is wearing that curse upon his own head as a crown when he dies for our sins. So it's actually really cool how Genesis 3 ties into the passion narrative as well.
Yeah.
That is, wow, that's amazing, guys. So I love the way this conversation is going. So I know, Dane, there's a couple more biblical things that you wanted to bring up. So let's go ahead and transition into that.
Cool. Let's talk about the week and the word yom and evening and morning. So I'll just lay out a couple questions, David, and they're all tied together. So
Dane, why don't you, instead of just throwing out questions, why don't you lay out your position? Because this is supposed to be your position. Because you guys are gonna overwhelm me if you
fair enough.
Just throwing questions out at me.
Keywords supposed.
I thought I was talking with Hugh Ross tonight, so
yeah, right.
I came prepared.
So the first and foremost, I believe that, and I think we're going to agree on this, David. I believe that Genesis 1 through the whole thing basically is history. Genesis 1 through 11 is historical. I believe that it's not poetry or metaphor or allegory. It uses genealogies in chapter 5. It uses geographical markers in Genesis 2 and 3. So I think that this is an actual history. And Jesus, of course, seems to believe it's an actual history in Matthew 19:4, saying, from the beginning, there was Adam and Eve. He talks about the blood of righteous Abel. And I forget what it's in Matthew 23 somewhere. He talks about the days of Noah in Matthew 24. So Jesus seems to affirm that all this is real history. It reads like real history. So this isn't a poem. This isn't allegory. Genesis 1 is an actual historical retelling of the creation event. And each day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, and day 7, it uses the Hebrew word yom, which certainly can, in certain contexts, mean a period of time that's not just a 24-hour day. You could talk about like in my father's day, right? And that would be like an allusion to a longer period of time, not a specific day. But in this context, Yom certainly seems to be speaking of a 24-hour day because it's always attached with the phrase evening and then morning. And something that's really important to consider is that unit of time, evening and morning, attached to day one, attached to day two. It seems to be indicating that all days of creation are the same amount of time. None of them say evenings, plural, and mornings. It's evening and morning. Each one seems to be containing the same amount of time. So I would say that God created all the stars in one day, and you would say that's day 4, and you would say it took billions of years and different stars pop up at different times and things like that. But there's other places in like Isaiah, I think it's in 40, that says, he called all of them, the stars, by a name, and not one was missing. So this idea of stars forming over long periods of time doesn't seem to jive with Genesis or Isaiah or even Job, that talks about how the morning stars all danced for joy when God was doing the work of creation, or sang for joy. And so anyway, I don't see any reason to see any of these days being more or less periods of time. They all seem to be representing the same amount of time, one literal day. And then it gets even more obvious, in my opinion, when you compare it to Exodus 20 and the 10 Commandments, when God gives the Sabbath law and says, the reason you should work for 6 days and rest on the 7th is because it's an imitation of me when I was doing the work of creation. So God is basically saying, y'all do your work week the same way I did my creation work week. And so I see no reason to take Genesis 1 as offering us various different periods of time. It all seems to be one day, one 24-hour day that actually ends up being the foundation of why we work 6 days and rest on the 7th. So that's kind of a really big overall thing with Genesis 1. And I'm not going into super detail because of our time limits. But one other quick thing is that the order of creation in Genesis 1, it is different from modern scientific cosmology. So it has vegetations on planet Earth created before the stars and the sun and the moon and all that. That, of course, would make modern astrophysicists cringe, secular scientists cringe. But the Bible is very clear that it's not until day 4 that we get the sun and the moon. And I know that some old Earth responses is that, well, the perspective changes. It starts out with, God's perspective, but then it comes to Earth's perspective. And so once the clouds and the fog kind of dissipate, then we see the stars that were already there. But I want to challenge that by saying Genesis 1 is all from God's perspective. It's God speaking, God working, and then God reflecting upon his work by saying it's all good. I can't see anywhere in the text where there's a perspective change to somebody, standing on earth looking up or something like that. And of course, humankind isn't even made until day 6. So there would be no human perspective on day 4 to begin with. So I don't think the perspective shift route works for old Earth. It's all from God's perspective. It's his work. It's his word. It's his creation. It's his reflection upon it, calling it good. And then it gets to his rest. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on just Genesis 1, the overall flow, the word yom, those kind of things.
I want to jump in before David answers that question. And David, I actually want to give you a choice on this. Okay. So there are some things that I would like to add to what Dane said. I think they're important to this part. But at the same time, brother, I love you. And I want you to, I don't want you to feel like we're trying to gang up on you. That's the last thing, brother. I want to lay a foundation for young Earth. And so you tell me, brother man, do you want to answer that question first, or do you want me to go first and add to what Dane said?
By all means, man. Go ahead.
Okay. So just in case, there's 2 points that I want to bring, especially tying Genesis 1, the day, the word Yom, with Exodus 20. The Jews, and I think we see this not only in their own commentaries, and I'm not going to quote them for the sake of time, but look them up, Rashi, Ramban. I do want to read Jubilees, because I think it's extremely, this is a prevalent text. Do I think that this is scripture or anything like that? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But the reason I'm quoting this is because I want to show what Second Temple Judaism thought. This is a text dating from between, scholars date this text from between 160 and 150 BC. And so even though it's not scripture, I do believe it gives us a piece of the puzzle that we need to look at and to examine. And so Jubilees reads this in the second chapter. It says, verse 1, and the angel of the presence spake to Moses according to the word of the Lord, saying, write the complete history of the creation, how in 6 days the Lord finished all his works and all that he created, and kept Sabbath on the seventh day, and hallowed it for all ages, and appointed as a sign for all his works. It keeps going, but again, for the sake of time, I encourage anyone to read Jubilees second, and then I've got the Epistle of Barnabas here, which is a very, very, very important early church, dating anywhere from between 70 AD to 132. This is early, and it was a very important document. In chapter 15, it reads this: further also it is written concerning the Sabbath and the Decalogue, which the Lord spoke face to face to Moses on Mount Sinai, and sanctify ye the Sabbath of the Lord with clean hands and a pure heart. And he says in another place, if my sons keep the Sabbath, then I will cause my mercy to rest upon them. The Sabbath is mentioned at the beginning of the creation, and thus, and God made it in 6 days, the work of his hands, and made an end on the seventh day, and rested on it, and sanctified it. Attend, my children, to the meaning of this expression. He finished in 6 days. This implieth that the Lord will finish all things in 6,000 years. For a day is with him 1,000 years. And he himself testifies, saying, behold, today will be as 1,000 years. Therefore, my children, in 6 days, that is, in 6,000 years, notice the interchange between days and years there, all things will be finished. David, and actually David Wilbur, both of you guys actually sent me a video on IP, Inspiring Philosophy, and I was so into that video. And then he quoted Irenaeus, which I've got that quote, but he failed to mention that I believe, and I would argue that not only Irenaeus, but Justin Martyr, Hippolytus, Commodius, and the list goes on, Methodius of Olympus, Lactantius, I could go on and on, but they are all quoting from this passage for their view of eschatology, right? And so I think those two facts really, really add weight to what Dane was saying, how this is a Jewish, and not only a Jewish, but an early Christian perspective on this text and the connection between Genesis 1 and Exodus 20. But David, I'm done. That was long-winded, but like I said, I think it adds weight. But brother, go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm gonna answer yours since it's like fresh in my mind. I would say it's irrelevant what they believed. They also believe
what's irrelevant.
I'm
sorry.
I don't what they believed. I think all of them thought the Earth was probably younger than what we have now.
Who believed? The early church.
The early church, yeah, okay. Yeah. If they believe that, obviously, people like Irenaeus believe that one day was like 1,000 years. I mean, that's clear. Even if they thought it was young, and from an
in a specific context, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the way they interpret Genesis, Tyler, is the important thing. Okay, they didn't hold to that a day was a 24-hour period. They held to it as 1,000 years. So that was, even if they thought the Earth was young, they still held that when he says day in Genesis, that it was 1,000 years.
Why did they hold that?
Because Irenaeus got it specifically from First Peter chapter 2:3, I think, where he says that one day is like 1,000 years to God. So I mean, that historically was his perspective. But yes, I think you're right. So I think you're mixing some stuff here. Or let me finish, bud. So I think you're mixing some stuff here. Although I agree with you that he thought it was a young Earth, he didn't interpret Genesis, the word day in Genesis, as a literal 24-hour period. And nor do I think the Jews in that literal period. I mean, they thought they didn't care about morning and evening, or evening and morning. It would have been evening and evening. You can find that in Leviticus as well. I think chapter 23, that was a day for them. It wasn't really predicated on like, 60 second or 60 minutes and 60 seconds and stuff like that. It's predicated on a lot of other things. So I mean, the way they told time and all that type of stuff was a lot different. But as far as that also goes, these were guys that also thought that the sun rotated around the earth. So I mean, their perspectives don't really matter when it comes down to what we've discovered. As we go on. I mean, we know that the earth isn't flat anymore. We know that we revolve around the sun. All the early church fathers would have believed that the earth was the center of the universe. So I mean, you can't just take it as gospel, everything they say, because they did get a lot wrong. I mean, we saw Irenaeus, or not Irenaeus, but Origen, had some whacked out views that me and you've been laughing about. I think we laughed about him cutting his gonads off for to be able to read the Hebrew Old Testament. But there's several different aspects to that. But Dana, I want to go back to you real quick, because you presented a lot, and I want you to ask me, what exactly do you want me to answer?
I'd be interested to hear about what you make of the connection between the Ten Commandments and Genesis 1. So it seems to me that God is basically saying it's a direct parallel. You work 6 days and rest on a seventh because I worked 6 days and rested on a seventh.
Oh yeah. So what I think here, and who does the best here? Right here, I actually concur with my friend Travis, right? My view is just a little bit different than his, because I add a framework, literary framework view into this as well. But I think it's analogical, which is one of the orthodox viewings of Genesis, right? We have the analogical view, we have the young earth view, the pure day age view, progressive creationism people call it. I don't even like progressive creation. I think it goes way too far. But there's about 4 or 5 different views when it comes to interpreting Genesis chapter 1, right? So I would concur that I think, I'm going to answer the question. I'm getting to it.
I was going to say, could you briefly state what analogical interpretation is?
I am. It's meaning that I think the days are day ages, but I think they're analogous to the 24-hour days of a human work week, giving a 6-to-1 pattern for the Israelites to follow.
Okay.
So I think it's analogous to that. So I that's where me and you would part on the way we interpret Genesis 1.
Okay. So if they are day ages, would you say that some days are longer than other days? So like, would day 4 have to be a lot longer than day 6 because the formation of stars is, I think, according to your view, billions of years, in the formation of Adam, you believe in a special creation that just took a moment. So,
we totally look at that different. I go also with the science on that too. So I do hold to mainstream science when it comes to that.
Right. But my point I'm getting at is when it says evening and morning, one day or second day or third day, how do you square that? One evening and morning could be 10 billion years, and one evening and morning could be 1 day, and isn't that kind of a convoluted way to speak?
No, I just think it's a literary masterpiece, and it's unique in how it's structured. You got to remember that the Jews only had 3,100 words to work with. That was the size of their vocabulary compared to ours, which is like over 4 million, right? So we have to think that, okay, well, a lot of these words have to be reused in different ways, and that's why context does the best job at interpretation, for us to interpret. So what I think is going on here is I see word structure here, which is really pertinent. So I see things like morning and evening being a day marker for like completion, right? So another thing that I would also say is that oh man, I just lost my place. So you answered two questions at once. But no, I think that the word structure is very important here, and this is why we get usually words that would be used at the same for the same thing in other places, that we get these two varying words in a second place. And I've actually talked to Hebrew scholars on this. I've actually talked to actual people that are professionals in this field, and they do say it could go either way because of the way that just because of the vocabulary limitations and stuff like that. If you really want, I can go into my view on what I think all this is, right? So
I just have a
question.
I just have a question.
And I'm not finished answering, but go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry, but I think it's important that I clarify for myself, if not only for myself, but for our listeners. And I've heard you say this. I've heard Dr. Ross say this, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but you said that, the Hebrew language is limited. And again, if this is misrepresentation, I'm sorry, but are you saying that they didn't have another word for like a long period of time other than yom? Or what's the point of saying that the Hebrew is limited?
Well, I think it goes to their word structure and why they use different words that sometimes would be used in a similar vein, that they actually would use it to actually make distinctions between things like created and let there be.
But we're talking about long
made,
right?
And and I haven't got to yom yet, so maybe you're missing that.
Well, that could be, but
yeah, I haven't got to
yom
yet.
Well, I'm just asking. There are other words other than yom that Hebrews could have used, Moses could have used to indicate a long period of time. That's all I'm asking.
Yeah, but yom is also quite common to do that with. So yeah. So and we can talk about how they contrast that with morning and evening, right? So I mean, that's if it's very unique to Genesis that he actually does that when it's used in that same sentence, in that same structure, just like that, and then there was evening. That's not done anywhere else in the New Testament. And they don't even use yom in the 38 times that it's repeated in that. And not only that, but in those 38 times that it distinguishes morning and evening with a regular day, it's scattered. It's not even within the same verse or the same sentence. And yom is never really used. So I mean, we would just, I mean, we could go through all those things and we don't have the time for it. Maybe we could do that sometime. But from the scholars that I've researched on this, they have counted it. And out of the 38 times it's supposedly mentioned, it's like that. But let me get back to Dane, because I mean, Dane has asked some pretty pertinent questions about yom and stuff like there. So yeah, I do want to, I don't know if I have thing on yom completely. So we get the first day. The Hebrew word for yom, right, is used. Young Earth creation proponents often harp on yom, meaning 24-hour period. However, a simple reading tells us that yom has 4 different translations in the first 2 chapters of Genesis, right? Scholars have disputed this for years. They say that yom shouldn't be attached to a number here. That structure of the first 2 chapters, to me, is unique. Gleason Archer, who's a scholar, another Hebrew scholar, says that the ordinal simply defines a symbolic unit of time, right? So it's and serves as no real evidence of a literal 24-hour day. And Gleason Archer is a world-renowned Hebrew scholar. Okay, so he goes on to say that the first day, the second day, stuff like that, in Hebrew prose of this genre, the definite article is used where the noun was intended to be definite. Thus, the days of creations are well adapted to a sequential pattern rather than to strictly delimited unit of time. However, I like William Wilson's word study on Yom. He says that Yom is frequently put forth or put for time in general or for a long period of time, like a whole period under consideration, right? So day, Yom, is also put for a particular season or time when extraordinary events happen, which I think goes to the structure of Genesis chapter 1 and 2, which I think, I don't know, you maybe disagree with this, but I think it is unique in how it's doing that. Genesis is not just history. It's polemic. It's analogical. It's polemic against other gods. They just spent 400 years in Egyptian captivity, right? So they're actually going right after those other gods. Like God is alone the one that did this. God
think
alone.
Dane and I had a good conversation about that. How the Genesis, does have that aspect to it. But Dane, brother, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, lot to talk about. I think that I think evening and morning always being connected with Yom here makes it harder for me to jump to an idea that it's describing a long period of time. And again, the consistency of each day being one evening and one morning, it makes it sound to me like it's all talking about the same amount of time. So that to me just doesn't fit well with Old Earth. And in terms of is Genesis history or polemic or both? Well, sure, there's a polemic. I mean, the whole Bible is a polemic saying Yahweh is the one true God. But I think that Genesis has to be taken as history because Adam is in the genealogy of Christ. And Christ. Another interesting thing is when Christ says in Matthew 19:4 that as it was in the beginning with Adam and Eve, it's the same Greek word that's used in John 1:1, talking about in the beginning, the Word was with God and the Word was God. And so, it seems to me that Jesus is really trying to tell us Adam and Eve were actually from the beginning. It'd be a real stretch of the definition of beginning for that to be, about 13 billion years after the real beginning, here's Adam and Eve. But to shift the conversation away from Yom, because I want to crunch in as much as we can here in the time we got. I do want to hear your thoughts.
Can I respond to the evening and morning thing real quick then?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so the word Arab and Boker used in this particular passage is unique because it means the beginning and ending of the definition of the particular day in question. Tyler asked, this is kind of like how I'm answering Tyler here as well, about the conjunction of day with morning and evening. Scholars note that it is used, like I said, 38 times in the Old Testament. The word day or yom is in none of them.
What is used 38 times? Evening and morning?
Evening and morning in regards to a day, but yom is not used in it. Okay, so the plural form occurs in 1 Samuel 17:16, but in most of the 38 times the phrase is scattered and not even in the same sentence. The structure of Genesis is plainly unique all throughout this chapter. It is more of the same. The scriptural evidence doesn't really hold us to a young earth interpretation at all, and to hold it must you have to change to hold a young earth position. You have to change the fixed laws of physics, and like you said, God could just supernaturally do this, supernaturally do that. So you get a God that is being kind of deceptive with the way things look as far as age goes. And then you also got this aspect of in Jeremiah 35, or what is it? 32, 35 or 33. Anyways, in Jeremiah, where it says that the laws of nature are fixed, that they're set and they're fixed. So, when I look at Genesis as an old earth creation, I see that we get a 10 out of 10 score when it comes to all the initial things that we learn from science, which we call the book of nature, right? Or nature in general. We see this, we see that it gets a perfect score. It gets a 10 out of 10, right? So when you look at the young earth creationist view, it doesn't get that. I mean, we see, and I can list them all if you want, but I'll let you respond.
Well, on that very point, you think your position gets a 10 out of 10 with modern science and cosmology in Genesis 1. So that brings me to the order of creation question. So day 3, you've got plants before you've got the sun in the sky. In the old Earth model, the sun is older than planet Earth, correct?
What's that? Oh yeah, sun is
yeah.
older than
So
planet
so I would actually disagree that you score 10 out of 10 with the science if you want to hold to the same chronology that the Lord gives us through Moses. So what do you think about the vegetation coming before the stars?
Yeah, so I don't think that's the case. Again, Galileo actually said one time that the worst thing about interpreting the Bible is getting the perspective wrong. You said you don't think of it being like the perspective shift is great, but we do see this aspect of God um, looking down and then going through creation, looking outward towards creation. He's hovering over the waters.
Where do you get the going through and then looking outward?
Well, you go from in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? That's a Jewish mirrorism for created all of reality. That's a mirrorism.
Yeah, that's the thesis statement. That's the thesis of the whole chapter.
So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? Created heaven and the earth is in its perfect tense here, distinct from the verb from in the remainder. It is also a Jewish mirrorism where coupled words form a different meaning than if they were left on their own. The theological word book of the Old Testament defines Hashayim we ha'eretz, and my Hebrew is terrible, sorry, as all the raw materials needed to make the sun, planets, stars, nebula, galaxies, and so forth. So yeah, we see that the earth was formless and without void, and that's where we see the Spirit hovering over the face of the deep, and now he's looking out. So we do see a perspective change, and then we get confirmation from this from Job chapter 38, 8-9, where he talks about the clouds being in intense darkness. And I would have to push back a little bit as well, because you're looking at God separates the day, right? He calls the day, right?
Light day and the dark night.
And the darkness night. Why does he have to do that again on day 4? Or day 4, right? So that would be a question for you to answer after I'm done. But first, let's look at what it actually says day 4, right? Then God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens," right? To separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it was so. God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He made the stars also. First, the text says that God made, right? Asa, right? He goes from bara to basha. Bara is what he's used in the beginning to talk about creating something brand new. Now we're looking at asa, which is made, right? The lights, not that he created bara, right? So asa expresses the idea of producing something from pre-existing material, not the idea of bringing something into existence that did not exist before, which we would have in bara in the word structure here. Travis is Tyler's shaking his head. Also, the verb asa does not specify when God created the heavenly bodies, only that he completed the action. Second, the Hebrew "let there be" does not imply the creation of the heavenly bodies in the sense of their coming into existence. "Let there be" is completed with the purpose clause to separate. This is thus the narrative. The literary aspect here focuses on the function of the lights rather than their origin. Finally, the third, the Hebrew "and it was so" denotes a completed action, that the sun and moon had performed the functions God commanded, serving as signs for years, seasons, and days. This could not be accomplished in a 24-hour period. All of these things argue against an instantaneous creation of sun, moon, and stars.
So I'm a little bit confused by the way you're reading "let there be," and I'm not a Hebrew scholar by any means, but if you're talking about that, let there
I'm
be.
not a Hebrew scholar either. Come on, man.
Well,
I'm just quoting for what the guys say.
you've quoted more Hebrew scholars than me. But let there be light is the first thing, that we see on day one, right? And you wouldn't try to argue that God brought light out of pre-existing material. And then you've got let there be a dome, and I don't think you would be arguing that that's bringing a dome out of previous material. So if you take, that's how God speaks every single day of creation, and if you take it to mean that he's using pre-existing material, then you have eternal matter, right? That he's not actually creating the matter, he's just transforming the matter into a special creation. But I mean, let there be is used every single day. So I don't understand how that could be meaning that it's making something out of pre-existing material.
If you look at the structure of the language, there's certain words that are used for certain things, right? So you got bara for created, like something brand new. Like I said, asa. So it's also placement of the words as well. So like I said, when it comes, it does not imply the creation of the heavenly bodies in the sense that they're coming into existence. Okay, so I think it's completed with the purpose clause to separate. Okay, so that's what I was saying there.
But wait,
I think there's a focus on origin instead of on function of the lights rather than the origin. So in the very beginning, I think the sun already existed. Okay, and there's a perspective change where God's over the face of the waters, and now he's ordering his creation, right? And he's clearing things, he's doing things, he's taking that formlessness, which ancient Hebrews would have related to chaos, and ordering it, and doing things. So, and I think that's just part of it. I don't think that's the whole thing, so, and I understand you have a different perspective here, and I understand your perspective, but I just disagree with it when it comes down to it. And I think that the text gives us that leeway. Thus why I think we're still in the realm of orthodoxy.
But I thought, and clear
because he created the
well,
light.
hold on.
Okay.
But a while ago you argued for fine tuning, right? And this is day 4, which obviously days 1, 2, and 3 have already passed. So is fine tuning still happening, or is God creating, as Dr. Ross would say, with transcendent miracles at this point?
Okay, so what I'm saying is that so I'm not saying the transcendent miracle. I mean, God's part of the process, right? So God's ordering the process, right? I think that, I mean, this is my view now. Yeah. So when he speaks, everything comes into existence, right? I think that the sun is already there, and God has now made the atmosphere go from opaque to where no light could get in to what do they call it? Transparent or translucent or transparent. I can't remember, but it's not fully clear, right? It's not fully clear. So now light gets in, right? So now the sun is actually doing that. So he does divide the day and the night. Now we obviously know that the earth is revolving around this time because we have morning and we have day and night, right? So obviously something's going on. It has to be rotated around something, right?
So light didn't get through before.
Yeah. And Job 38 confirms this, right? So it says, or who enclosed the sea with the doors when it went out from the womb bursting forth, when I made a cloud its garment and thick darkness its swaddling bands. So what is Job is saying here? And Job is supposedly older than even Genesis as far as the written account. 38, 8-9. What we know from science is that the Earth did have an atmosphere as thick as Venus's, even thicker, okay, and stuff like that. So, if no light's getting in, there's no osmosis, right? We know that that's a primary component of what light does, and what is needed for life. That's what.
So there wasn't plants then, right?
No, there wasn't plants then.
Well, the plants are on day 3, which is before.
Yeah, that happens after there's a water cycle. The day 1 is when the where light gets day one is when the end of day one is where light actually is now able to come in. So
hold on,
yeah.
you just said though that day 4, that's whenever light came in because
no,
God
day
separated
4
the
is
darkness.
when no, then I misspoke. Then day 4 is when the atmosphere clears to being transparent, completely
so that
transparent.
light can get through, correct?
Not only the light gets through on day 1,
Okay,
but
gotcha.
it's not the atmosphere is still not clear, right? It's still covered with clouds, with some clouds. So I said osmosis. You're right, Richard. It's photosynthesis. My bad.
So do you believe that these days are long periods of time?
Absolutely. I already said that. Yeah.
Yeah. So the plants are going a long period of time before the sun is fashioned and put in the dome of the
Travis.
sky. I don't see how that works with the modern secular scientist. The textbook.
Okay. Then I do need to read to you how the modern science works here. Okay, so
because it's my understanding that the scientists would say that the sun is way old. Well, is a much older entity than the Earth, and certainly much older than vegetation. But the Bible has the vegetation first, and even in your view that it's just the clouds dissipating, the day 4, it says that that's when God set the dome in the sky, set the lights in the dome of the sky, set the sun and the moon in the dome of the sky. So God is repositioning the sun and the moon, and putting it into relationship with the earth.
And he's setting their function to give light to the earth at that point.
Yeah. So, but even if you have a way to bring the light from day 1 in as what's feeding the photosynthesis of the plants, you're still going against. There's still no way to square day 3 and day 4 with the modern secularist science.
Again, it says, then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the night or the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for season and for days and for years, and let them be for light in the expanse of the heavens. Right. So so God had made this previously, right? He created the moon already, and like I said, they're already there. It's just now we're starting to see them on day 4,
but they're just not functioning.
Day 4,
well, they're not set in the dome.
They're not set in the dome. Well, they're in outer space anyway, so we know that for a fact, right? So, like, he's just describing. He's given us a snapshot in a way that an ancient Hebrew person could understand.
Well, it sounds like God.
So here's the science. Let me go to the science because you asked about that. Okay, I don't want to get pigeonholed or down other rabbit trails when I'm trying to answer one question, and that's how you get discombobulated in a discussion.
For sure.
So as far as what science predicts, and this is how it lines up with Scripture, God created by fiat miracle, and here's where your transcendent miracles come in, Tyler. So God created by fiat miracle the entire physical universe. Okay, this is day 1. Okay, space, time, dimensions, matter, energy, galaxies, stars, planets. Right, Earth is empty and unfit for life. Right, Earth's atmosphere and interplanetary debris prevent the light of the sun, moon, and stars from reaching the surface of the Earth's ocean, right? And we do know that the Earth was a water planet at one time, and it's the great oxygenation events that end up causing the land masses and so forth. Travis, I could be wrong. Maybe you can correct me in the chats, but that's what I can remember off the top of my head. So God cleared away most interplanetary debris and partiality and transformed the Earth's atmosphere, making it translucent so that light from the heavenly bodies could penetrate to the surface of the Earth's ocean. God then formed the troposphere with just the right conditions to establish an adequately abundant and stable water cycle. I think this is now we're in day 2, right? God formed ocean basins and continental land masses. God produced plants on the continental land masses. God transformed the atmosphere from translucent to occasionally transparent. God produced swarms of small sea animals. God creates by fiat miracle birds and sea mammals. God creates by fiat miracle land mammals capable of interacting with the future human race. Evidence for the role of the non-human bipedal primates comes from the late Pleistocene extinction. I don't even know. Extinction rates for large-bodied mammals. Okay, so I'm going to skip that, right? Day 10, God created by fiat miracle the human species, Adam and Eve. Okay, so this is kind of like this also goes with the science of it, and Travis is throwing some stuff in there. He's talking about the heavens and the earth, verse 1, totality of reality, and he also talks by plate tectonics. So yeah, the reason I quote Travis here a lot too is because me and him have very close views, even though I might deter a little bit and misspeak on some of it because he's into this earth science more than I am. I'm more into the cosmology aspect, or the cosmology aspect of it. So
I guess the question that I would have, and then Dane, feel free, is that I'm still having a hard time understanding if so. Let's just take day 3 and day 4 as functional, and that's all they are. That God didn't create, that they're already there and they're functioning. I'm still having a hard time understanding how plants and everything that's made on day 3 can be functioning as plants and all these things if the sun is not there functioning to give light. Is God sustaining these things until he clears the clouds so the sun can do its thing, or what's going on there?
Okay, so on the scientific aspect of this, Tyler, as well, what we're saying here, what I believe where the old Earth position is very strong and how it explains what we see as a snapshot in Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
I see that the Earth the goes from opaque on day 1 to translucent. So that means UV light is actually getting in now. Okay, so the plants can be created. So these things can happen.
As
and you see that, that there is a function aspect in day 1, right? So he separates the day from the night, right? So there is that function is also there in the end of Genesis 1:1, and I think that's how we say it. But guys, yeah, we gotta conclude, man. I gotta get out of here.
Well, go ahead, Bob. Dane and I
can
finish. I mean, that's cool. If you got to go,
can I have like one more like 5 minutes? Okay.
Yeah, you got 5 minutes, bud. Go ahead. I mean, I got probably about 10 minutes left. So
okay. And I need, I know we all got to go, but so
yeah, I gotta
are you saying that? Are you saying
good.
Are you saying that in verse 1, in the beginning when God created the heavens and the earth, that happens, instantaneously? The verse 1 is the heavens.
I think it happens over billions of years.
Okay, so you believe
I believe the Big Bang, inflation, and so forth. Yes,
right. I'm trying to. I guess I'm trying to understand you, because I would have imagined so. So you believe the Earth is what, about 4.6 billion years old?
Yes.
And the universe around 13.5 billion years old?
Yes, closer. Yeah.
So when God says the beginning, he's talking about 13 minus 4. I'm not that great at math, but what is that, 7? It's more than that, isn't it? 9?
Yeah, something like that.
9.
Yeah, I know where you're getting at. Go ahead.
So the beginning, in your view, is 9 billion years of time.
Well, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So he's using a Jewish Miranism. So I would say, yeah. I would say that first day encompasses all that time that he used to create. And I don't, if you look at it from God's perspective, I don't think that that's really a big deal. It's all happening for him in a different process. I don't even know how he tells time.
God speaks to us in ways that we can actually understand.
And I think that's why he uses the way he uses. That's why he had it structured the way he had it structured. Yeah, absolutely.
For me, there's no issue with this all being the beginning, because I think the heavens and the earth were created just days apart and fashioned and formed. But to me, it really stretches the definition of beginning to say that this is a 9 billion year period. And actually, it's even more than that when you start adding how long it takes the Earth to start having vegetation in your view. So you're actually looking at the beginning, if you get all the way to Adam, as basically 13.5 billion years.
Yeah, but like, why is that a problem? I mean, I don't think that's I don't think that's a huge problem on my view. I mean, I don't think that's because I don't think that's what the Hebrews had in mind when they were writing this.
Well, let me ask you,
I don't think they were having.
How old do you think Adam lived?
I mean, I don't know for
how
sure.
long ago. How long ago? What would be a rough estimate?
I would give it about 75,000 years ago.
Okay, so the beginning is
I might be wrong.
The beginning, in your view, is roughly 13 billion years, and everything else is,
Yeah, I think it took. I think it was a process, and I don't have a problem with how God described that process. I think He leaves that for us to discover.
That would be like saying, though, that my beginning was when my great-great-grandfather was conceived. That's a weird way to talk.
It's really not. It's really not when He says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Right? He created all this stuff. Right in the beginning. Right? The beginning is like. I was just about to say that, is whenever the beginning was, so like,
beginning was whenever the beginning was.
I don't think, so I don't, in other words, I think you're reading too much into it on that point.
Well,
so that's just my opinion.
Are spans of time on the scale of billions of years something that
but we already know that it's weird, right, Dane? I mean, we already know that one day is 1,000 years to God.
Right, but you see, I wouldn't think it was weird. I would think that when God said in the beginning, he means that in a fairly literal sense, that like the heavens and the earth were made in this beginning week. And it's interesting. It's funny. People say, you believe God made the heavens and the earth in 6 days? That's hard to believe. I'm like, it is hard to believe. I mean, he could have done it in 1 second, So even 6 days is a long period to call the beginning, but it's a lot less than.
Hey, Dane,
and you're just putting your own limits and your own definitions on it, which is fine. I mean, we could do that. This is where the freedom is, I think. But the Hebrew does not limit that to us. Okay, the Hebrew doesn't limit that to us. And I gave you the Hebrew scholars that can. I gave you some of the Hebrew scholars that actually studied this and actually had spent their entire lives looking into the Hebrew language and stuff like that. I also have a friend that I could put you in contact with if you'd like to talk about these things. But the point is that, like I said, we know that, and I want to bring it back around to this because we have gone on for a while. Okay,
and we didn't even get to it about.
No, we didn't. And that's fine. I can.
We'll have to do a part 2 if
y'all are up for it. Yeah. I'm always up for it. But like, I want to bring it back around is that God created everything. We both believe that.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
And I know you struggle with obviously the way that my interpretation goes. I struggle with it the way yours has. So when I look at this, buddy, I look at like. I normally judge theories by the evidence that also supports it, right? So I have this process in my brain, right, where like even my presuppositions are formed by what I've learned, obviously, and what I have a bias towards, but that's how this works. When you look at this cumulatively with all the evidence, and for me, it comes to that, and I think the scripture confirms exactly what that evidence portrays. And you think the opposite, so I don't know where we go from it. However, we both agree on the main things I think that are important.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I agree that we agree on the main points. And I do think it would be cool to talk about the evidence, because I actually think there's a lot of evidence for a young Earth in the scientific domain.
That can be part 2 with Travis.
Yeah, like there's a big difference between something like flat Earth, where no PhD would dare to put their name on it because it's such an absurd theory. But a lot of PhDs put their name on young Earth, and paleontologists, geologists, astrophysicists, and
Do you have a number for that?
Sorry?
Do you have a number for that?
I don't
know
have
only like a few. It's kind of like those guys that also say that Jesus was a myth. I think that's
well. Yeah, I mean,
Hugh Ross also said it's probably easier to defend flat Earth than it is young Earth. So
well, he also has an axe to grind with young Earth, but no, I don't think it's actually that hard to defend at all scientifically.
Okay. Yeah, I would love to get with you on it. Yeah.
But I am not a scientist. Like, the reason I like to drill down in the Bible is because I'm definitely a theologian first. I would never claim to be a scientist. My degrees are in religious studies and Master of Divinity, so certainly nothing in geology.
Well, I'm my degree is in philosophy and apologetics. So the thing is we're both better than Tyler here, who's got a degree in heresy. So
yeah,
yeah, absolutely. No, I don't have any formal degrees, and I'm proud of it because I love this. I love sitting back. I love listening to you guys talk. And at the end of the day, science and all these things, I think as Christians, right, our fundamental primary source of information, of truth, not just of information, but of truth, comes from Scripture. And so, and at the end of the day, you both, and this is more so for our audience than it is really towards you guys and everything. I love you guys both. I've got mad respect for you all. But at the end of the day, go home and read these passages. Look at what we've been talking about. Pause this video, rewind it, go back and listen to it. Really, really listen to it. Because I think there's a lot of good things that both sides really, I believe that both sides can take away from this discussion. I'm extremely pleased on how it went. And David, I think you're a good sport. I hope you don't feel like Dane and I tag teamed you. Too bad.
We get Travis here. It'll be a lot easier for me to bounce off of him and him to bounce off of me. So we'll be able to work together a little better.
I think that'll be a fun.
That will be actually really fun.
Yeah, I think that'll be a fun discussion.
Yeah, I'm up to keep it going. You could do 10 2-hour videos on this topic. I mean, there's a lot to dig into.
And there is. There really is. And so for our listeners, I really hope that if you wasn't interested in this discussion, you are now. Dane, I want to thank you for coming on and giving our side really to this discussion. I'm still at the end of this. I'm still young Earth. I'm so happy that I can put this topic down to bed to rest. No, I'm just kidding. But I do look forward to getting back full time on Greek now, so that'll be fun. But David, you got any last words, brother?
Yeah, man, I would echo you, Tyler, except for I would add to it, don't get lost on the subject. If you study this subject,
yeah.
If you study the subject because you love it, because you love the science, because you love the Bible. All right. And pick your position. There doesn't have to be a war between faith and science. We often, put these up as markers that do that, but they don't have to. Okay. There are positions that you can hold to as a Christian that you don't need to feel ostracized to hold. I hold to an old Earth, Dane, and I still hold to an old Earth. Dane holds to a young Earth. That's fine. I still love Dane. Right. Me and him can look at each other at the end of the day and be like, you know what, man? What's the most important thing to you? And we'd both say Jesus, right? And that's the beauty of it, is that, we have more important things to be after, right? Like old Earth, young Earth, they're fun to talk about, but ultimately we need to make disciples, right? We need to go out and reach the lost. We need to take care of the poor, the sick, the fatherless, the motherless. We need to go out there and do things like that and focus on what's important and trying to persuade people of the gospel of Jesus Christ and what is of first importance. And what is of first importance is the death, resurrection, vindication of Jesus Christ and what he does in people's lives, So put that as your primary focus. If you do this, you do it out of love for your discovery. I'm an amateur astronomer. I know how to tell what makes a star, what things are in a star, and I, go out and I stargaze. I have a huge telescope over here. That's my power seeker. It's not that huge, but it is my power seeker. I love it. I love to look at the stars. Matter of fact, I was probably my goal was to get up really early tomorrow morning, because the way the planets are right now are in such a beautiful spot early in the morning, where they're actually bigger through the telescope. I'll explain it easier. I won't give you all the technical terms, but it's easier to see some of the planets right now, and I would really love to go out there and set my telescope on them and observe them. Beautiful looking stuff. But yeah, there's nothing like going in the backyard or going up the street and showing your kids the rings on Saturn. So yeah, I just love the science. I love it. My problem with the young Earth creation is, like I said, it gets rid of the fine tuning of the galaxy, and I think that's a phenomenal way that shows the truth of who God is and how finely tuned he made this whole creation. It's so intricate. And like I said, guys, at the end of the day, me and Dane are brothers. That's all there is to it. So yeah.
Dane, you got any last words, brother?
Yeah, I mean, like David said, this is a in-house discussion. It's like when we debate or discuss eschatology or how to understand the sacraments. I mean, we're brothers, and we agree on the fundamentals. And at the end of the day, old Earth, young Earth, we're mostly focused on the Savior of the earth, Jesus Christ. And we all agree that he died for the sins of the world, that he was raised on the third day, that he's coming back in glory, and that he will judge the living and the dead, and he will establish a kingdom that knows no end. And so we rejoice in that glorious hope and that glorious truth. We love the Savior. And I'm going to keep thinking and believing the earth is young. I see it as the easiest way to understand Genesis, but it's a deep conversation and a lot of science involved and all that. So
yeah,
study and keep digging and keep praising God along the way.
For sure. And for our listeners, thank you all for joining us on this episode of Faith Unaltered. We actually have Travis Worth himself joining us next Friday night, 7 p.m. KEQQradio.com. You have all been great. We have been hopefully Christ-like, and we will see you next time on Faith Unaltered. Good night. God bless, and stay like Christ.